Hi, guys. So, once again, I would like to welcome you back to the podcast. As always, I'm glad you guys had the opportunity to take a little time to join us here today. So, today, what I wanted to talk about a little bit is a different approach to the challenges that everybody runs into as part of their exploration and journey, their spiritual exploration and journey. What I want to do is I want to talk about an alternative way of approaching how individuals look at and explore those particular challenges. That though it's a very simple method, I think in doing it a little bit differently than how most people have approached it, we'll talk about how that approach came about. I think you'll find that you'll have large dividends. You'll see quicker movement, faster integration, maybe we'll say, the inability to shift the experience you're having of life in a much more efficient and a quicker way, which is always nice, right? So, of course, in this exploration, the foundation that we always come from here is that you are the self. You're the higher mind, you're the soul, you're the oversoul, you're all that is, your spirit, your God, whatever terms you would like to use. You're really much, much more than just the physical you than you may have considered yourself to be for quite some time. Now, you may be one of those individuals who's quite familiar with that concept already. It's something that because you've studied things, explored yourself for a long period of time, you're comfortable with that particular concept. Or it may be something that because you're relatively new, is something that is kind of a new idea for you. So that's the foundation. That's something that you always want to keep in mind as we move into whatever subject matter that we're talking about, because whatever it is that I share here, it always comes from that perspective, the perspective of the more of what you are and how to apply those ideas to the experience that you're having here. Okay. So, in talking about this new perspective, this new approach to how to look at the various challenges that you can have come up, I think I want to start with the idea of what is usually termed the ego. And so there's lots of ideas, depending on the philosophy that you're associated with and about that particular word, what the ego is. So I want to talk about it in association with this particular journey, this particular exploration, a spiritual exploration. And so in that, maybe in terms that are a little bit more aligned with maybe how Eastern spiritual philosophies may have termed and described that particular phenomenon. Because really, what we're talking about is a phenomenon, right? Is an experience, right? And so, particular experiences have been labeled that name, have been called the ego, right? Besides calling it the ego, we could call it the personality. In fact, one of the terms that I'm relatively fond of is the focus personality, right? So, in other words, taking this very large identity, this very large personality you have as the oversoul or as the soul, and focusing it down to a much more narrow, shall we say, a much more circumscribed experience, right? And so, in that, the ego is very much a participant in that experience. And so, one of the things that I want to suggest is that if you have any negative concepts, negative ideas about the ego, that you kind of take them and you place them aside. Because really, you come into this exploration intentionally. You come in and you create this experience of quote unquote physical reality because it has a particular quality to it. And we call that quality, those experiences, physical reality. You created this experience for yourself intentionally. In the audio podcast, I've mentioned, and in fact, in a couple of those episodes, we've delved into what are termed the mechanisms of consciousness. And so these are a collaboration of the various ways that we move closer to this experience. We slow our vibration, shall we say, and the various ways that we use consciousness to have this particular experience, right? The mechanisms of consciousness that we utilize to have the experience that we're having, physical reality. The ego part of that consciousness, right, has a particular role to play within the mechanism of consciousness. Its role is to keep you, a portion of you, focused in this experience, right? That's its role. That's the role that you created it to undertake, right? And it does it very well. Now, one of the things that you may not understand about the ego is that it is actually quite a bit more flexible than most individuals think it is. Most individuals will talk about the ego as something that's this very rigid structure, and you need to kill it, you need to break it, you need to break free of it, whatever. I'm going to suggest to you that it does have this role. Again, its role is to focus you here within the experience of physical reality. That's what the ego is about. That's what the focus personality is about, right? So you're never going to get rid of the ego in that regard as long as you're still here in physical reality, because that's what its role is to focus you in physical reality. So you're not going to get rid of it, and you don't want to get rid of it. What you want to do is you want to learn how to use it. You want to learn its attributes, right? Now, again, we talked about the focus personality. So if you can maybe imagine yourself standing on a cliff, and if you're a little bit maybe leery of heights, you can think about standing back 20 or 40 yards from the edge of that cliff, but still you can see this really huge vista out in front of you. You look around and there's all this stuff. Maybe there's mountains and there's large plains and maybe there's this large river that flows out into the distance. You can see all of this stuff, right? And then you look just straight ahead of you and you focus on something that's maybe on the other side of the canyon that you're looking at, right? Maybe it's a tree and there's some activity in the tree. You can see the tree, but you can't make it out so well. So you pull up a pair of binoculars, and they're very powerful binoculars, right? And so these binoculars at first see a very wide view, right? And the tree's in there, but you've got all this other stuff. And so you focus those binoculars down, you get very close to the tree so you can see just the tree that you're interested in and the activity that's happening in the tree. Maybe there's a nest, a bird's nest in the tree. Maybe it's an eagle's nest, and the eagles are coming and going. Maybe there's chicks that are in there, and now they're born, and they're maybe, let's say several weeks away from being able to leave the nest. And there's all this activity that's happening, right? And so these binoculars allow you to become very focused on what's happening there, right? Now, all of this other stuff around you that you saw as you were looking around from the top of that cliffside, all of that's still there, but now you're just very focused on the activity of that tree and what's happening with that tree and around that tree. That's your experience here, metaphorically speaking, right? All the rest of you, all the rest of the self still exists, and all this other activity is still going on, but you're very focused. And this focused personality that you have, the ego personality that you have, is very focused on your experience here. One of the things that we've done in terms of an idea that's very familiar with us here within this reality, and that idea being time, right? A linear flow of time in particular, and this idea of a past, a now, a present, and a future. One of the things that we've done in terms of a past, right? A very long historical past, is we have used the focus personality, the ego, in a particular way. And as a result of that, created a particular effect and particular ideas about the way our consciousness functions within our experience, right? So, in terms of time, many centuries, many thousands of years now, what we've done is we've considered our focus personality, our ego, to be the king of the hill, shall we say, right? This is where all the activity happens. All the rest of the information is somehow down deep within us. And at the top of all that stuff is the ego, right? The ego is the king. The ego is the one that makes all the choices, makes all the decisions, right? About all the things that are going to happen, right? That's the idea that we have right now. Let's talk a little bit as we move into this about some of the mechanisms of consciousness that make up that focused personality, the ego. What we want to start doing in terms of this other approach that I was talking about is paying attention to the way that consciousness moves through itself to create this experience that seems like it's happening somehow out there, but really occurs within the substance of who we are as the soul, as the oversoul, as all that is, right? So if we think in terms of God or the oversoul, this infinite, unlimited expression of spirit, of consciousness, of awareness, of all the various attributes you want to attribute to that, right? It's unlimited. There's no end to it, right? There is, in that regard, no such thing as empty space. It's all filled with God. It's all filled with spirit. It's all filled with all that is, whatever you want to say, right? And so there's this unbelievable, from this perspective, unimaginable aspect of you that I typically term all that is instead of God. The word you use, of course, is totally up to you. So all that is, meaning it's just that. It is all that is. So from that perspective, there is an aspect then of all that is that personalizes itself quite a bit more. And that aspect of all that is the soul. We'll say your soul, right? An expression of consciousness that is developed, I guess we'll put it like that in this moment, to have a particular type of an experience. Now, that experience is still fairly broad, but a particular type of an experience. And in this regard, we're talking about a physical experience, right? Because there's many, 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 really an infinite number of different experiences within the substance of God or all that is. So, a physical experience. Now, of course, there's quite a number of physical experiences. So we have to talk about this physical experience, right? So that's where now consciousness begins to delineate itself a little bit more about how this particular physical experience is going to come about. All the ideas that are going to be associated with it, all the themes that are going to be associated with it, all the ways that things are going to happen within it, all the various parameters that are associated with that particular physical experience, all these things are going to become part of what consciousness does within itself as it moves closer and closer and closer to having this physical experience, right? So it starts out there as all that is. It focuses itself down a little bit more as the soul. And then it begins that process of moving more closely into our physical experience. In that, it creates, shall we say, another aspect of itself that maybe we'll term in this moment the higher self or the higher mind, right? And in that, it begins to focus a little bit more strongly on what it wants to do with the experience, right? And so if we talk in terms about an unlimited number of vibrations within God or all that is, and then there are not quite all those vibrations, in fact, much less vibrations, a spectrum of vibrations that are utilized within the soul, right? Depending on what that soul is going to do. And so, in that, the higher mind is the same thing. As you move into the expression of the higher mind as a part of consciousness, you do the same thing. You choose from a huge number, you still have a huge number of vibrations, but you're choosing to alter those vibrations to have your experience, right? In essence, maybe slowing those vibrations down a little bit. It's kind of like having steam, which has a very high vibrational rate, in association to water, shall we say. And as that vibrational rate slows down, cools down, maybe we can say, then it forms water. And if you slow that vibrational rate down even more, then it forms ice, right? Something that is solid, a crystalline kind of a thing, right? So this is, metaphorically speaking, kind of the same process that we have going on with you as consciousness as you move from the experience of the all that is to the oversoul, to the soul, to the higher mind. Then what you do is you create a layer of consciousness, we'll call it that just for the explanation, that you can term perhaps the blueprint level reality, or maybe the template level reality, right? And this is where you begin to get a little bit more specific about the themes of what you're going to do, right? The concept of planets, maybe the concept of atmosphere, right? The concept of maybe the types of beings that are going to populate these planets, right? Things of that nature, galaxies, stars, things of that nature, right? Maybe things like gravity and things of that nature as well, right? All the various things that you're going to do with the ideas that you have about how you're going to then bring about in a collaborative way, right? Bring about this particular physical experience. And so you go through this process of stepping down, perhaps we'll say, your vibrational rate to what we might say a slower and slower vibrational rate to begin to have a more and more crystalline experience until you, in the end, have this physical experience that we have that functions the way that we have it, right? Now, in that, the ego or the personality structure that's associated the most strongly with this particular experience has a number of attributes that, for this particular kind of an experience, we have created it to have, right? Now, when you get into the densest layer of, maybe we can say, the psyche or the mind or the personality, that particular layer is expressed as what we experience as thought. Okay. And we'll talk about these things a little bit more, but we're just going to lay a little groundwork to start first. Less dense than that, right? Closer to the soul level, right? A higher vibrational level, maybe we'll say, is your feeling state. Okay. That's not as dense, shall we say, as thought, vibrationally speaking, right? We're talking about here how close to the soul, how close to a broader perspective of consciousness are we talking about? Closer to the soul yet, and again, part of this whole experience of our vibration changing and altering to have this kind of experience, closer than our feeling state is our beliefs and our definitions, right? Consciousness expresses itself there at a rate that's a little higher, shall we say, a vibration rate that's a little higher, right? Then above that, we have other ways of expressing our consciousness that move higher in our vibration and encompass a wider and wider view of how all of this is coming about. But I'm not going to get too much into that yet here, because I want to talk about these other three that we've just mentioned. All right. Now, these three mechanisms of consciousness, thought, feeling states, and we can even see emotions in this, and beliefs and definitions, are kind of like the three-sided triangle that is like the foundational aspects of what it is that creates for us our experience of physical reality for us. Now, there are other things that are associated with that, but these things are like the three foundational building blocks of that. So let's talk a little bit about these and the role they play, a role that maybe you may not have heard before, although you may have some familiarity. We're going to start with the densest, we're going to say, okay? And again, we call it the densest because it is the expression of consciousness that is as low as you can go in that regard. It's on the floor of the basement, all right? And this way of understanding it's going to be important as we talk more about a different way of approaching your challenges than what you've been doing previously, possibly. Okay. So thoughts are on the floor of the basement. All right. They're as dense as you can go. Right. Now, thoughts as a mechanism of consciousness have a job to do. Right. And that job is this: thought is meant to translate and interpret information, your information, right? That's what thought does. Some people mistakenly believe that thought is the aspect of consciousness that creates. One of the reasons you can believe this is that much of the earlier information, when this information was quite a bit newer to all of us, talked about thought when this concept of conscious creation was first being mentioned, right? And as we continue to talk about this mechanism of consciousness and these three attributes of the focused personality or the ego, then we'll talk a little bit about why it occurred like that initially, all right? But it's been expanded beyond that. And if you've journeyed in this way for a while, you'll recognize that as we talk about it, okay? So again, thought's job is to interpret and translate information. So, what information, right? Where does that information come from? It comes from, in one way, the level right above it, right? The level that's a little bit closer to the soul, the level that has a faster vibrational rate than it does, right? The feeling state, right? So, feelings are a type of communication. They're one of the ways that the self, the higher mind, uses every single day of your life to attempt to communicate with you, to attempt to bring you information. All right. Now, one of the things I'm going to mention here is that thoughts are also very closely associated with that next level up, which are your beliefs and your definitions. All right. These three are very closely tied together. Right? It's not like there's a large gap at all. It's almost like they're three pieces of some sort of a substance that are one on top of each other, right? And the information easily passes from one to the other. They're kind of like that. But they do have distinct vibrational, in this metaphor, vibrational qualities. All right. So feeling states are a form of communication. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? And I'll give you some examples. If you go to the audio podcast, which has the same name as this podcast does, I have one episode in particular, but I've talked about this in a number, that's entitled in the way that you'll recognize it, that talks about feelings and emotions as communications from the self, right? Because that's, in fact, what they are, right? And they're there to communicate what beliefs you're using, right? And in this, beliefs are perhaps the most important side of that triangle that is associated with the focused personality, because beliefs are kind of the primary filter when it comes to being focused in physical reality, to having the physical experience, that consciousness flows through, your consciousness flows to then create the kind of experience that you're going to have, right? In the way that you have it physically, in a more especially circumscribed physical way. I'll use the word limited here, even though it's really not limited, but I think you know what I mean when I use that word. So let's get back to feeling states as a type of communication and their association with the beliefs that the deeper you is trying to help you understand you using in the moment by sending you a particular feeling state. All right. Some examples, right? If you think about all the various times that you were sad and all the various circumstances that you might have been sad, and you don't necessarily need to do it now, but once you're done watching this, just take an opportunity to do that and see if this is not true in that moment. When you were sad about something, it's because you believed there was some sort of loss that had occurred or was about to occur or something like that. There is a belief in loss, right? Now, of course, in our physical experience, we can have the experience of loss. But because consciousness is connected to all of itself, there actually is never loss that occurs. You're always tied into all the various permutations of what can transpire within your reality, regardless of what happens. It doesn't make any difference. If somebody, quote unquote, dies, right? They actually don't die, of course. You will never die. What you do is you begin to have a different experience, right? You're still consciousness, you're still the soul, your spirit, and you're still in that regard connected to all other aspects of consciousness. And so if you're still within the physical experience and somebody else leaves the physical experience, it's only because you believe in death and you don't really understand your experience as consciousness in a deep enough way to understand that really there is no severing of that connection. It's still there and you can still interact with that individual. But the beliefs that you have in death, in association with the beliefs that you have in physical reality, typically don't allow that. Now, with exploration of self, they can, but typically they do not, right? And so sadness is a feeling state that the deeper you will send your way, shall we say, to tap you on the shoulder to give you an indication that in this moment, you are tying in to the belief of loss. Okay, that's what sadness is about. Let's take anger. Anger is the deeper used way of trying to tell you that in this moment, you're using a belief that says you have no choice. You are without choice in that moment. Or you believe, of course, that you are without choice in that moment. Understand that in that moment is what you're doing with yourself. You're telling yourself in that moment that you have no choice, right? Think about all the times again that you were angry. Contemplate all those various times and see if that was not a strong component of what was going on there. You'll see that it was. You will believe that in that moment, you thought you were choiceless. You believed you were choiceless. Okay. So we'll explore one more so you can understand again that feelings are a type of communication from the deeper you that talks to you about the beliefs that you're having here. Now, of course, there are many very nice feelings that we have too, right? And these will convey to us understandings, and sometimes they're beyond beliefs, right? But understandings that we have about the expansive nature of who we are, right? That we're actually interacting with that aspect of ourselves. And so there's a different feeling state that shows up. Okay. So we have all sorts of feeling states, right? And then again, what goes on is that thought is there to interpret that, right? Now, we'll talk a little bit more about thought as we've talked a little bit more about the feeling states. and the beliefs. We'll integrate this a little bit more. And again, this is all on the way of talking about a different way of approaching the challenges that you have in your existence, and how there has been a way that they've been approached for quite some time now that has made it quite difficult to move beyond them. It's a pretty simple thing to do. So we'll express it, we'll explore it. So let's continue here. So, one more example of the way that a feeling state is a signal, a little tap on the shoulder from the deeper you that says, hey, there's a particular type of belief that you're using here in this moment that I want to make you aware of, so you can maybe choose to use something different if you want to. Anxiety. So, with anxiety, you find yourself in a fearful situation, which is creating enough fear that your choices in that moment are very clouded. In other words, you can't see your choices clearly. It's not that, like anger, you believe you are choiceless, but you can't see your choices clearly because of fear that you're associated with in that moment. It's clouding your ability to see your choices, and anxiety ensues. Anxiety is sent to you, that feeling state is sent to you again from the higher you in that moment that you have that circumstance and situation going on, is sent to you again as a signal to you that, hey, in this moment, you're utilizing beliefs that bringing about fear. In that, there's confusion so that you can't see the choices that you have. Right? So it's bringing you information. Okay. So again, that's what feeling states are all about. Now, many times we take those feeling states and we project them into our environment as emotions, right? There's this movement of feelings, right? And again, of course, there's nothing wrong with any feeling states, regardless of what they are, right? I'll suggest to you that one of the foundational attributes of this particular physical dimension is feelings and emotional states, right? We created that idea and utilize that idea within this particular physical dimension intentionally, right? So there's nothing wrong with it, of course, in any way, shape, or form, but they are a form of communication, and understanding that can be incredibly helpful if what you would like to do is to move beyond the way that you've been experiencing certain situations and circumstances in your life up until this point in time. So it's nice to know these things. So again, what we're talking about here is the focus personality or the ego structure, right? And how it focuses us in our experience, right? How we're having this physical experience. So again, the third part of this triangle are beliefs. And a little earlier, we were saying that beliefs are probably the most potent aspect of that, right? It's the beliefs that you create, that are created by all of us that participate in this quote unquote physical dimension, right? That are very integral to how the feeling states and our thoughts are then played out in our experience. So your beliefs are very important in that regard. So I've used this example before to talk about beliefs and how they would generate a particular feeling state. So we'll talk about just this really briefly, just so you can get an idea about what I'm talking about here, and how these are in fact very integrated, and how foundational your beliefs and your definitions are to what kind of feelings then ensue, and then the way that you use your thought process. So let's say you're walking down the street, and walking towards you all by itself with nobody else around it is a large dog. It's on your side of the street. It's coming to you. It's maybe 40 feet away. Right? Now, if you were an individual that was raised with dogs, had fun with dogs, played with dogs, had all sorts of various other interactions with dogs, you have created and have aligned with yourself are influenced by certain beliefs, certain things that you believe are true about dogs that are going to totally influence the kind of interaction you have with that dog, that are going to bring up certain emotional states within you. And then through that, your thought process is going to work on that as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. If, on the other hand, you were an individual that in the earlier parts of your life maybe was bit by a dog, was attacked by dogs a couple of times, just had various unpleasant experiences with dogs, you've created very different beliefs about dogs. Those beliefs will very much be in play as this dog walks towards you. As a result of that, the feeling state that those beliefs generate within you are going to be very different than the feeling state that's generated by somebody who has different beliefs about dogs. Right? And then again, thoughts will ensue about that. You will interpret and translate that experience in alignment with the emotion and feeling state that you've got going on, and of course the beliefs that are there and some other influences that are happening, right? So this just as an easy example to see how the beliefs that you're carrying around generate the feeling states that you have. You will not have a feeling state in any way, shape, or form unless there's a particular belief that's there that that feeling state is associated with. Okay. So what we're talking about by and large here, of course, is again the ego or the focus personality. That aspect, that those mechanisms of consciousness that are denser in vibrational state, right, than the higher self, the higher mind, the template level reality, the blueprint level reality, the soul, all these other aspects of things, right? All these things that are above you in vibration, right? All these things are of a vibrational rate that is closer to you as the soul. In this, when we're talking about the way that we get communication, not only do we get communication from the self through our feeling states, but we get them, of course, in other ways as well. And you may be familiar with many of these. One of the most potent ways we get that is through the imagination. The imagination is a conduit from the higher self to us, bringing us information, right? And it depends in that regard how allowing we are of our imagination to play a part in our life, right? And this depends on a variety of different things, right? Especially the thought process, the way that we interpret and translate our relation, our environment, our reality, right? Which again goes back to the beliefs that we might be carrying about our reality. We also have our dreams, whether it's our dreams at night that communicate with us, or maybe a daydream state that communicates with us as well, right? There are things like intuition, impressions, impulses, insight, right? There are your senses, your regular five senses within physical reality. They can be a form of communication from the self once you understand how to use them as that, right? The world around you, right, can be that through those five senses. So there's many, many ways that the deeper you, the higher mind, the soul, will reach out and communicate with you. And the more you pay attention to that, the more information that you're going to have come your way that you can then apply to your situation. So within your situation, within physical reality, as you walk your journey, your spiritual journey, as you explore the deeper aspects of who you are, typically what's going to happen is you're going to run into those limiting ideas about yourself, the beliefs that you have within yourself, those influences that you've had many times in the earlier parts of your life, but they can come from a variety of different places, right? That influence your consciousness in this moment, that stimulate the utilization of particular beliefs, that then stimulate the expression of particular feeling states, that are then associated with certain translations and interpretations that you make with your thought process that then bring you a particular type of an experience in reality. Okay. So in this, the focused personality or the ego has been synonymous with the rational, logical, intellectual ways that we utilize thought in particular. All right. And our beliefs. Those ways of looking at your experience have become a very powerful filter as the centuries and the millennia have gone by. In this, we've come to believe that rational, logical, intellectual ways of looking at things, the thought process, the interpretation, and the translation that we make is the pinnacle of who and what we are, right? Is, shall we say, the top of the heap, right? But in fact, the thought process and those things that are more closely aligned with the thought process are vibrationally speaking the densest, right? Again, the feeling state is above that. Our beliefs are above that, vibrationally closer to the soul, shall we say. And then the other layers above that, right? Your individual conscious state, right? That houses lots of the ideas about how this particular reality is going to come about. The collective consciousness, right? How all of us are coming together, which is in fact where all of our interactions are happening. Because again, the experience of reality that you're creating makes it seem like you're having all the interactions that you're having directly with the people that are around you physically, but it's actually happening in a much different way than that. And so the collective consciousness is a big part of how all that happens. And then the template level reality is above that. And then the higher mind is above that, the higher self, the soul, and then, of course, the oversoul, and so on and so forth. So we have, starting at the basement of thought, starting at the basement of the focused personality or the ego, the very focused part of the ego, the part of the ego that believes it's the physical self, right, is the densest part, the lowest vibrational part of who and what we are. Where what we have done for many centuries, many millennia, is we've considered it to be the highest part of what we are, right? And even in today's culture, most individuals think of it in those terms, right? And because we think of it in those terms, we use something like the subconscious in our language, right? To talk about those aspects of conscious that are below this part of our consciousness, or the unconscious, which is something that's even maybe below that. If we talk in terms of everybody, we could say the collective unconscious, right? So we have these ideas that there are aspects of consciousness that are deeper, which would mean slower in vibrational rate, further away from the soul, that we believe the things like our beliefs reside within. But that's a mistake. That's not actually the way that it works. It's the thought process, which is what we're doing as we're translating and we're interpreting how all of this works, right? Because of the beliefs that we have about how all of this works, right? The beliefs influence the thought process because the beliefs are more powerful than the thought process is, right? Because they are closer to the soul, right? They are vibrationally of a higher vibrational nature in that regard. All right. So many times what we do when we have a challenging situation in our life is what we do is we try to look deep within us for the reasons why all these things are going on, right? We try to go deep within our consciousness, deep within our psyche, right? Deeper than the psyche that we have right now, what we consider to be our regular consciousness, to look for the things that are creating our challenges, not understanding that we're already as deep as we can get. We're already as dense as we can get. There's nothing below where we are right now, right? All the places that we need to look, the feeling states, the beliefs, the definitions, the influences that we've had, all those things that we need to look at, right, are not below us, deeper than we are. They're above us. They are higher in vibration than we are, than what we consider our consciousness to be in this particular moment, right? The focused personality, the ego structure in that regard, the very tight ego structure. Because again, the ego structure contains all of these other vibrational states as well, right? It actually has much more flexibility to it when you actually understand the depth and breadth of what it is than what we've considered for a long period of time. So there's a metaphor that you can utilize that I believe will be effective for you in this regard. When you explore our physical reality, it's kind of like when you explore underwater. If you're going to go, let's say, in the ocean and you're going to explore deep in the ocean, you have to put a particular type of a suit on to be able to do that, right? A suit that acts as an interface between you and the environment around you, right? That's what, in essence, the ego structure is. It's a suit, it's an interface between you as consciousness and these mechanisms of consciousness that you've created, these layers of mechanism of consciousness you've created between you, in essence, and the experience of physical reality, right? They create that layer, right? So you are within, and in this metaphor, above all of that. Okay. So just like if you're exploring in the ocean and you need the right kind of a suit, as you're exploring physical reality, you have kind of a suit as well, right? You make that suit out of consciousness. You configure consciousness in a different way. So if we can then think of being on the surface of the ocean and donning this suit and jumping then into the water with this air supply with us so we can breathe, and going down, 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 right? What we do is we go down through the layer of beliefs and definitions. We go down further through the layer of feeling states and emotions. And when we land on the bottom of the ocean, we're at the level of thoughts, right? Interpretations and translations. We've reached the bottom. There's no further that we can go. So if what we want to understand is what beliefs there are, what influences there have been that have brought us the challenges that we have right now, we need to go up to find those things. We need to go up to explore those things, right? We need to get off the ocean floor and we need to lighten our load and go a little higher in our vibrational state, because it's in those layers of consciousness that are lighter, that are more vibrationally rapid, shall we say, right? Closer to the soul, metaphorically speaking. It's in those layers of consciousness that we can begin to understand our feeling states. It's in those layers of consciousness that are, again, a little closer to the soul that we can begin to understand our beliefs and our definitions about things, right? And as we move higher and higher and higher, shall we say, closer and closer back to the soul, we begin to understand more and more about the way that we've configured consciousness, how we've created this mechanism of consciousness to then have the experience that we're having, right? So you can also, in a meditative state, think about you being on the ocean floor and moving up from that depth. And as you get closer and closer to the surface, releasing the ways that you have interpreted and translated things, releasing the particular feeling states that you've used, and moving beyond neutralizing certain belief systems that you've used as you move into a place where you understand yourself as the higher mind. Now, in that, as we've talked about the way that consciousness configures itself as we have this physical experience of ours, the blueprint layer reality or the template layer reality is kind of the middle ground, right? It's like if we talk about the surface of the ocean as the interface between what's going on below the ocean and the air above it, we could say that that would be the template level reality. And all those other aspects of the self are above that, right? The higher mind is above that, and the soul is above that, and of course, the oversoul is above that, right? So that's the interface. So that layer, the template level reality, is the layer where the themes about how you are going to express all the various things that you express here within physical reality, how all those things are played out, how they're all explored, and how choices are made as far as how you're going to have those experiences within the ego structure, within the focused personality. Now, a big part of that is going to depend on the beliefs that you're associated with at the moment, right? And so you're interpreting and you're translating those beliefs, but you're also being influenced by communications, right? The feeling states and the other types, all the various, we'll just say it like that, all the various types of feeling states that you can have depending on what you're associating yourself with, right? What beliefs you're associating yourself with, or what attributes of that deeper you you're associating yourself with. So the more you become in tune with openly allowing your imagination to flow into this experience, openly allowing your intuition to do that, your inspiration, your impulses, your impressions, to utilize all the various things we talked about a little while ago, as far as all the various forms of communication that can come from the deeper you, the more you utilize those in that energy, right, with the idea behind it that you are the higher you are the self, you are the soul, with a desire to have that experience, what you then want to do is when you begin to look for the things that are causing you issues, you want to begin to look at those lighter vibrational states. You want to look into those higher vibrational states of feeling states. You want to look into those higher vibrational states of the definitions and the beliefs that you have. And you want to look above that. You want to look to the communications that you get from the higher you, from the self, from the soul. Right? All of that becomes like a package that you utilize each day as you're doing this. Right? Now, what frequently occurs is that if what we do is we attempt to go into our consciousness and we attempt to look deeper than where we already are for the answers to our difficulties, what happens is that because there is no deeper to go, we get like a reflection back. We get like a shadow back of really those states that are above us, right? But they don't quite look the same way and they don't bring us answers because we're looking in the wrong place for those answers, right? We're not looking towards the soul in those higher parts of ourselves, those higher vibrational parts of ourselves to understand our emotional states, our feeling states, to understand our beliefs, right? To tie into the communications that are coming from the soul that are a little outside of the restricting beliefs that we might have, right? Beliefs that bring us particular types of experiences, right? Because we're not looking in that direction, because we're looking deeper, and there is no deeper, because again, we're on the ocean floor with our thought process, right? But our thought process, as we're interpreting and translating, we're interpreting and translating that there should be something deeper, because again, we have believed for a long period of time, in terms of time, that that aspect of us is at the top. And so there has to be all this other stuff below us, underneath us. But really, it's reversed. That part of us is the densest part of us, the most crystallized part of us, right? It is, in that regard, vibrationally the slowest part of us. Wider and faster vibrational states, as we move closer to the soul, what we're doing is we're moving away from that deep spot that we brought ourselves to. But because we don't believe that to be true, we keep trying to look deeper within ourselves in a place that we believe is deeper than where we are, the subconscious, right? The unconscious, for our answers. But our answers aren't there. Our answers in places that are actually above us. So we have to look towards the higher self, towards spirit, to get the answers that we want, especially when it comes to the communications through the intuition, through the imagination, through impressions, through impulses, through all those various things. Those are the things that we want to pay attention to the most. Now, there's a phenomenon that happens as you do that. What goes on is that as you allow those forms of communication, intuition, imagination, and the other things, to be the things that you actually act upon in your physical reality, the higher you recognizes what it is that you're doing, right? In that, of all the various scenarios that are going on within the template level reality, it begins to funnel different scenarios your direction, right? And there's an alteration that goes on through all of the levels. You start using beliefs differently, which means that the feeling states that come your way are different. And as a result of that, there's also a translation in the way that you're interpreting and translating what's going on around you, because you're becoming increasingly familiar with how this whole process works, with the way that the mechanisms of consciousness function to bring you your experience of physical reality. So, looking at your experience in the opposite, in the reverse of what we have been doing for such a long period of time, is a very powerful way of doing things because of the concepts that we've just talked about. Because of the idea of thinking that we have been at the top when really we've been at the bottom, vibrationally speaking, right? We've had this concept of rational, logical, intellectual, which is very tight and circumscribed way to have the experience. It's not a bad experience in that regard or a wrong experience in that regard. It's just a very circumscribed experience, right? It's a very tight experience. It only allows you so much of the experience. Now, that was intentional, right? I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with this. What I'm saying is that we've kind of gotten as much as we can possibly get out of this experience. We've exhausted exploring this experience in such a limited way. And now, in this time period, right, in this transformational time period, in this shifting time period, whatever you would like to call it, what we're doing, what the potential is for you to do if you choose to do this, because of course, like everything else, it's choice. You get to choose which beliefs you use. You get to choose how you want to approach things. You get to choose how you want to be influenced by things. So if you choose to, what you can do is you can bring an increasingly, I guess I'll just phrase it in this moment, large amount of who and what you are as the higher mind and the soul into your experience here. That has to be a choice. And you'll do it through this methodology, through understanding that what you thought was the pinnacle of who you were is really, vibrationally speaking, the basement of who you are, right? And you have to look up, you have to look back towards the higher you, towards the self, towards the soul, for all the information that you're looking for, because the feeling states lie in that direction. The beliefs and the definitions lie in that direction, right? And certainly the intuition, the impressions, the impulses, dream states, the imagination, all those things that can help you understand the broader concept, the broader experience of who and what you are, lies in that direction. So what you want to do is you want to think in those terms. Always think higher than where you are. Always think more expansive from where you are, regardless of what it is that you're looking for. Otherwise, all you get is that shadow reflection back and finding yourself asking why, over and over and over again, because what you're doing is you're not pointing your exploration in the place that it can actually find information, because there's no information to be had deeper than where you are right now. You're on the basement, you're on the floor of the ocean. You have to go up. You have to look into self, right? That's the only place that you're going to find that information. It's not, you could say, metaphorically speaking, and of course, this term is used a lot, to look within you, to look deep within you, all right? As long as the concept is that when you're doing that, you're looking into those expansive aspects of self, right? Not that you're looking deeper into the psyche as if you're going down into the psyche, right? Because again, you're as down as it goes. The elevator has reached the very bottom of where it's going to go, with you as the logical, rational, intellectual aspect of who and what you are. The thought process that interprets and translates in association with those ways of looking at things. Now, again, nothing wrong with that. It provides a particular type of an experience. But if what you're looking for is a broader and freer experience, an experience that brings you much more choice, an experience that brings you a life that is much easier to live, right? An experience that brings you feeling states that are much nicer feeling states to have as part of your experience of reality, then what you want to do is you want to point yourself in the other direction, right? You want to search for your answers in a different direction, not deep within the psyche, but higher within the spirit. That's the direction that you want to go. Okay. And you can use this metaphor maybe as a type of a meditation of being someplace deep in the ocean and slowly coming to the surface and moving closer and closer and closer to those states of who and what you are, right? Those higher states of who and what you are. And let your imagination play a part in that. Let your imagination do the things that it wants to do, because again, the imagination is part of the communication of the higher you. The higher you knows that now what you're doing is you've chosen to look at this whole process in a different way. And it will utilize with you collaboratively the imagination to do that. Let the imagination have some reign. Okay. So, in this, again, become familiar with the way that consciousness expresses itself, the mechanisms of consciousness that are utilized to have this seemingly physical experience, right? And understand that you can approach it in a very different way. You can approach it in a way that is much more facilitative to you moving into a higher experience of self, instead of attempting to have that higher experience of self by going down into the depths of who and what you are, right? Into what we typically term the subconscious or the unconscious, because they don't actually exist in that regard, right? There is no subconscious. All aspects of consciousness from this foundational type of consciousness that we have are actually broader. They know more, they have more information. And you don't have to go in those terms that far to reach a layer of your consciousness that has a huge amount of awareness beyond what you have right here. All right. So it's always more, it's always higher. Okay. So that's what I wanted to bring to you today, a different way of approaching your understanding of your exploration when you have challenging circumstances and situations that are going on. So, in this, I have an email that's associated with this. Again, it's freeformspiritualwisdom@gmail.com. If you have any questions, certainly put them in the comments. You can send me something, an email if you want to. If there are aspects of this that you would like me to explore in a more focused way, perhaps, or maybe expand certain areas a little bit more than what we've done here, I usually respond from questions that individuals have sent to me which are the reasons why I usually approach these types of subject matters or things that I've been stimulated from other things that I've heard. Is why I do these things as well. So certainly feel free to reach out if you want to. Again, if you haven't yet, there is much more information in the audio podcast than what I've had here because I've been doing that for almost 2 years now. So go to the audio podcast, that again goes by the same name, and you'll find a lot of information that I've shared there. So I hope you guys all have a great day. I hope that you're all, again, enjoying your experience of your exploration of self more and more all the time. And of course, the challenges are going to be part of that. But being able to effectively interact with those challenges, of course, is a very nice thing to be able to do also. So once again, take care, and I hope that you have a great day.